I feel like sometimes the spiritual realm or the spirit world can be talked about in a way that's very dualistic, like it's some sort of parallel dimension or something like that. And that's a common depiction in science fiction or something like that. Like Stranger Things, there's the Upside Down, where there are these, evil Demogorgon monsters, and there's only maybe a few ways to get between the real world and then the underneath world, and they only have kind of small ways of interacting with each other, or having an influence on each other. And that sort of depiction between sort of angels or something, angels and demons operating in some kind of parallel universe or something like that is relatively common. But I feel like a theme in both of you is wanting to not have such a strong dualism in how you think about spirit, and thinking about it as something kind of more integrated into, you could say, I don't know, this world or something like that, but in kind of a subtler or different sort of way. And so I'm wondering if either of you wants to pick up on that.
I want to jump all over that, like a lot, because I actually did a course on Jonathan's symbolic world, and this came up as a specific theme, and it goes towards a course I taught at the University of Toronto on the cognitive science of religion. That's going to be on my lectern, three courses in a row, seeing God again for the first time. And what I did, we went into the course, and I said, I'm not going to start with a definition of religion and then try and work out all the arguments for and against, all that, and blah, 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 blah. I said, what I'm going to do is I'm going to instead say that modernity has put a gridlock on us of all of these dichotomies. And one of the things that was, Derrida was mentioned, deconstruction was largely the recognition that modernity was engaged in a performative contradiction. It had rejected the dichotomy between the supernatural and the natural, only to submerge that into the dichotomies between mind and body, fact and value, subjective, objective, etc. And what you get in both the continental tradition through people like Derrida and the analytic through people like Putnam and Quine is what you get is this devastating critique that isn't motivated initially by like, let's bring it down. They're just wrestling with arguments. So I want to make that really clear. But all of these dichotomies have been deeply deconstructed. Catherine Pickstock does an excellent version of reviewing all of this in her Aspects of Truth book. But you take any of them. So, for example, the subjective and the objective, that is largely moribund because of the notion of affordances, the notion of relevance. Relevance is neither subjective or objective. Fact value. Okay, well, we like again. Is relevance a fact or a value? Other thing, and I won't do them now. You can see the courses. There's just devastating arguments against all of these dichotomies. And what I see postmodernism, unlike Jordan Peterson, I think there's legitimate argument within postmodernism. And I think one of the things they did was they caught out modernity and said, look, you reject this one dichotomy. By the way, let's make a distinction between distinctions, which is just two things are not logically identical, and a dichotomy, which is to claim they're ontologically different kinds of things. Those, okay? Distinctions are fine. We're talking about an ontological claim here, okay? And I think what postmodernity said is, like, you do all that and then you smuggle it all back in. And I think that's exactly what Jonathan was talking about when he cited Derrida. All these dualities or hierarchy, like it's all, and I think this is part of the problem. And this is what Desmond points out, is we get locked into that. And as long as we're in this grammar, I'm going to say something sort of radical here. I don't think we can see, I don't think we can renew the senses the way Wynne talks about, such that we could see the sacred or spirit. It can't be. Look, Desmond says we're in this sort of default atheism, because what we do, for example, is we have objectified being, so it's valueless fact, and then we've subjectivized value, so it's unreal value by a being whose ontology is of no value, and that's default atheism and nihilism. And as long as you're in those dichotomies, like, you can't actually, I'm saying something very Wittgensteinian, but very strong. We can't actually talk about what we're trying to talk about here. And so for me, it's not like John hates dualism. Yeah, that's true. But putting that aside, I'm trying to make a stronger argument that as long as we're in the framework given to us by modernity, I think postmodernity deconstructs it, but is unable to give us an alternative. So
Yeah,
that's another thing.
sure.
Okay. As long as we are in that framework, we can't talk about this. And I mean, I want to be, I've become more sympathetic to like the imagery that's being used. The problem is when the imagery is taken as being like something like these words don't. Another dichotomy that's breaking down is the literal fictional. Is the space inside your head where you are aware of your own mind? Is that a literal space? Well, no. Is it a merely fictional space? No, because it gives me real knowledge that's presumed for rationality. So what is it? It's imaginal. Like all of these things are breaking down, and we're coming back to our phenomenology in a deep way. And so it's I'm going to leave it at that. I'm making a really strong claim that, and again, I'm not saying we don't make distinctions. I'm clearly not saying that. In fact, I'm invoking a distinction between distinctions and
yeah.
What I'm saying is, as long as we have a dichotomous like way, dichotomous grammar of picturing the world, we can't talk about the sacred or spirit because it dooms us inevitably. We're doomed to a inevitable sort of default nihilism, substance ontology nihilism, all these problems if we have that framework. And what I'm trying to do, and I know it sounds a little bit hubristic, and I hope it's not, I'm trying to say if we can deconstruct this and we look again into the depths of our experience, and even our sensual experience, not just our conceptual experience, does a new sense of the sacred and what spirit can mean emerge for us. And I think this is what Desmond and other people are arguing. So what I'm trying to get is like a modernist take on what I'm saying is like, oh, John's offering another theory within our overarching framework. That's not what John is doing. John is trying to say, no, smash the framework, because if we stay in the framework, we can't see, and I mean that even sensually, we can't see what we're trying to talk about.
Yeah. I feel like, Jonathan, no one's done more to smash the distinction between literal and metaphorical than you have. So I'm curious to hear what you have to say about that.
Well, I want to also get back at your original question, because obviously I grew up in a world where the way you describe spirits and the way you describe angels as existing in some kind of parallel dimension, as existing invisibly, but like invisibly really like us, but we just can't see them. Something like that, like as if angels and spirits are basically like individuals, kind of like me, but I just can't see them, and maybe I could talk to them if I was in a certain position. Like all of that is obviously just ridiculous. Like it's ridiculous, and it is not very useful, let's say. And so the traditional Christian position, and the one in the church fathers that is the most, and it's the same position as the Neoplatonists, and it's the same position as the ancient Greeks, right? Is that the spirit, or you could use the word soul, is the thing that animates. It's the thing that animates multiplicity together. So you have a bunch of stuff, right? You have a dead rabbit, it's a bunch of stuff, and then you have a living rabbit, and the living rabbit is a bunch of stuff, but it's acting in a pattern towards unity, right? That's what spirit is. And so in some ways you can think that the spirit is indwelling, right? So that's also a mistake that people think, like the spirit indwells the matter. But then people think like, where's the soul? Like in what part of the body? Like where it's like a physically quantifiable thing. It's like, no, it indwells in the sense that it has to indwell it to animate it, right? It's like the spirit of the rabbit is in all the parts of the rabbit to the extent that they work together towards the rabbit actually having an autonomous being that you can recognize and you can see is animated towards purpose. And so that is what spirit is. That is what spirit is in the Bible. That's why the breath of God is blown into a bunch of dust. And once you have a bunch of stuff, right, just like the dead rabbit, and then God puts spirit inside. He just blows spirit inside, and then all of a sudden you have a man, because that's what life is, right? Life is things that are joined together and animated towards purpose. And so we kind of have to, and that's even the way that, like, even that's what angels are. Like angelology, I was reading St. Gregory of Nyssa again, and he talks about your guardian angel and your guardian demon. And he says you have a guardian angel, and really just like in cartoons, like there's an angel on your right hand and a demon on your left shoulder. And what the angel is basically it is a being that is motivating you towards the good. And the demon is a being that is motivating you towards your disintegration. And so what is the spirit? Spirit is it's motivational directionality. Like it's basically animating movement towards purposes, right? And so that's really the way to understand it. It's not that and so can it appear as woo? Like, yes, sometimes, like, can you, in an imaginal space, in the way John talks about, can you encounter these as visions or as voices, or all of that is completely possible. There's no reason why that wouldn't be real. But it doesn't mean that the spirits exist in like another dimension, like kind of like you talked about in Stranger Things. Anyways, so hopefully the way that spirits appear in that way, like kind of like in another dimension, and they kind of like pop up, or they appear to you and scare you and all that kind of stuff. The way that they do that is mostly in the demonic space, because what happens when you encounter that type of spirit, you could say, is that it appears explicitly as, you could say, something that is not you, that is threatening you, like something that is like a beast that is coming to eat you, because it's moving you away from who you are, right? It's pulling you into hell, like you see those little images in the. But all of this is, even if it represents itself to you that way, it's an imaginal experience, right? It's something like these motivating spirits that are real, by the way. They're not just in your mind, because they have how can I say this? I've said this several times, like, the spirit of anger is the spirit of anger for everyone. Like, I know when I see it, if I see someone being possessed by anger, it's like I know what that looks like, and it's an objective thing that I can see. Objective. Let's not use that word again. But it's something that can be identifiable and that acts the same way on all different peoples, or similar ways, in ways that are patterned, and therefore that spirit necessarily has an existence outside of my individual mind. It'd be then it would act completely idiosyncratically to me. Like, that doesn't make sense. It's acting uniformly across multiple beings and is motivating them towards a purpose that I can recognize, and therefore it has a form of being.
But does it have a form outside of people's minds or something like that?
Well, I just said, yes, of course it does, because what would that even mean? Like, you mean that the spirit of anger would only exist in your brain? Is that what you're suggesting?
Or that it seemingly can only act through brains or something like that.
Well, but of course it can. The spirit of anger can only act through living beings, because anger is a motivating agent for human beings. It's not, or maybe there's some connection to animals to some extent, but it's not just I don't see why the spirit of anger wouldn't act on trees. Like, that doesn't make any sense. Or, I mean, maybe in some weird way you could find it, but I don't think that it does. Mm-hmm. Like, it doesn't motivate. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Hopefully.
Yeah. But it opens up a possibility. Again, if what I just said a few minutes ago is taken to some degree seriously, we should be looking for even, and this is the tricky thing, and I think that's what Sam's trying to get at. And I'm going to point to the work of Michael Levin, right? Are there non-psychological descriptors of spirit that are nevertheless legitimate descriptors? And so Mike is doing a lot of work showing that cells are not genetically, by their genes, determined. Obviously the genes play a role, But what seems to be happening is something like a bioelectrical community forms. And you can do really weird things. Like if you separate the community, the cells will become different things. Like he takes stuff from the throat of human beings and isolates it in a certain way, and it self-organizes into this thing that has a tail and swims around and moves around. It's like, right? Or you get cancer, and what you do is you don't try and kill the cancer, you try and convince it, right, that it actually belongs to the community around it, and it stops acting like cancer. Right? And more and more and more, right? And even you get an algorithm running on a computer, and you change the environment the right way, and the computer, meaning some interaction between the hardware and the software, like does stuff that is not part of the algorithm in order that the computer can deal with the environmental thing. Right? And none of these are psychological terms. And yet it sounds to me, Jonathan, that they would land very well with what you mean by spirit.
I'm obviously, I'm really a Christian, so I'm way more radical. I think that's how everything works. Like, I think the entire cosmos, even non-living systems, work that way. It's just that it's far easier to see in living systems, because they have certain characteristics. They have a kind of autopoiesis. They have all of these things that and if you look at traditional thinkers, they'll always say that in some ways they'll say something like, obviously living beings are closer to the image of God, and obviously the man is the highest version, the closest to the image of God. But ultimately, I think that spirit animates all things. Like, spirit animates all things that you can recognize as being patterned. Everything that you can recognize as having both one and many has to be the subject of some aspect that we could call spirit or principality, or you can use different words.